Hey everybody, Foley here. Welcome to the weekly news recap for the 30th of June to the 6th of July 2025. So, this week, we're going to start off with what is probably the biggest news story, definitely of this week anyway, is that Microsoft expected to lay off up to 9,000 employees, includes Xbox staff. So, this is about 4% of Microsoft's entire global workforce. It's aimed at Microsoft as a whole, so the Windows group, the Cloud group, the Azure group, etc. But a significant amount of it is aimed at the video game group, the Xbox side of things. So this is following weeks of rumors and speculation. We all kind of assumed that it was going to be a potential bloodbath, and if anything, it's probably worse than that. So you don't exactly have the exact number of layoffs yet, because this news was kind of earlier in the week, and this is a kind of a holiday weekend for the US, so we don't know exactly. We do have some information from international studios. Anyway, today's announcement marks the fourth round of layoffs at Microsoft and Xbox in the last 2 years. So they've been indulging in these layoffs for quite a while, starting in October 2023. When they acquired Activision Blizzard for $69 billion, and they've basically just been laying off people since then, in the gaming side of things anyway. So Phil Spencer's memo is pretty shit, honestly, but I'm gonna kind of go through a couple of them. So why are we laying off all of these people and making terrible decisions? It's to position the gaming for enduring success and allow us to focus on strategic growth areas. Cool. I'm glad that was the reason why I'm losing my job. Appreciate it. Increase agility and effectiveness. Increase from 0? What does that even mean? Agility of a company. You're not like a fucking athlete or a gymnast. And effectiveness, we're gonna be real effective by fucking canceling projects, but okay. This comes at a time when we have more players, games, and gaming hours than ever before. So you're successful. You're being successful, and we're also laying everybody off. Our platform hardware and game roadmap have never looked stronger. Citation, particularly around hardware. Citation needed on that one, because you have definitely been losing to PlayStation the last 2 generations, maybe. PS5, PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series, etc. And it doesn't look like they're planning the next Xbox exactly, considering they're going with their Xbox Anywhere messaging marketing. Anyway, this is delivering on the expectations the company has for our business. So this is, to be honest, probably the only true statement in the whole memo, and it's that Microsoft, Big Daddy, not happy with Xbox. It's not happy with the $69 billion for Activision, and they're not seeing a return on investment on that. This is coming from the kind of acquisition spree that Xbox went on. And Activision was a huge chunk of that. It was $80 billion total for acquisitions since, I don't know, 2020, maybe, something like that. Almost 70 billion of it was Activision. It's ridiculous. A ridiculous amount of money to spend just to get Call of Duty, really, is all it was for. It was not worth that kind of money, and they're not getting that kind of return. And Microsoft are like, where is the return? Why don't I have the money? Why don't I have the money right now? Well, if you don't have the money, you're going to have to get the money somehow, so we're going to lay off a bunch of people, really. Anyway, that's what I mean when he says delivering on the expectations that the company has for our business. That's the only real true statement in this whole memo. But probably not for the reason he was trying to lay out here anyway. Simply put, we would not be where we are today without the time, energy, and creativity of those whose roles are impacted. Cool, thanks for making us successful, now fuck off. Pretty much. We'll be providing severance plan benefits aligned with local laws, including pay, healthcare coverage, job placement resources. Then something about, apply within the Microsoft video game section, and your applications will be given priority review of probably a few thousand people. That's not really helpful. But I wanted to highlight this one because why put this in brackets? Why add this at all aligned with local laws? Like, what? Why? We're providing severance plan benefits, but only insofar as we're required to by the law. That's what that sounds like. You're getting the bare fucking minimum, is what that sounds like. And also, don't be shocked that, like, international people probably get better severance than you, because lol, labor courts. Anyway, it's a big bunch of nonsense, was the memo, and I only really wanted to highlight this one because it really does, like, it's the only truthful statement in the whole thing. Anyway, I think the rest of the article is just talking about why the memo was there in the first place. Anyway, so we heard about layoffs. Layoffs are almost certainly going to affect projects, games, and so on. So, talking about that, a couple of games have been cancelled. So, Perfect Dark reboot coming out of the initiative has been cancelled, and the initiative itself is being closed. So layoffs for the entire studio, so that's cool. Anyway, Matt Booty, great name, terrible person. Decisions reflect a broader effort to adjust priorities and focus resources to set up our teams for greater success within a changing industry landscape. Who's changing it? Because you own, like, almost every studio at this point. Like, they own a sizable chunk of video game developers. Like, if anyone has the ability to change the industry, it's you. And what you seem to be doing is just doing what everyone else is doing. Cool. A broader effort to adjust priorities, focus resources to set up our teams for greater success. They only opened the initiative in, like, 2022. No, not 2022. When did they open it? 2018. Just before COVID. Set up our teams for greater success. Set up our teams. Get shuttered. I mean, look at Tango Gameworks, the same thing. What they wanted to do with them anyway. This is a California-based studio. The initiative was established in 2018 by former Crystal Dynamics people. Perfect Dark was going to be their first game. That's obviously not going to happen now since the game has been cancelled and the whole studio has been let off. This is a note from Matt Booty, but it doesn't really say anything else. Yeah, pretty shit. Like, we did have this alleged playable slice of Perfect Dark that was at one of the Xbox showcases of last year. I'm going to skip ahead to what was allegedly gameplay. It's been kind of rumored, speculation, what have you, that this was all smoke and mirrors. You know, this was like duct taped together a couple of things that almost certainly fell apart almost 2 seconds afterwards, kind of thing. Like, the game was never in a complete state, etc. You know, there's probably some justification for cancelling the game anyway. I don't think there's justification for shutting the whole studio. You know, you could have just let them go on their way. You could just, like, set them loose. Hand them the IP, even. Because you're clearly not doing anything with it. Or sell it to them for pennies or whatever, you know, a co-publishing deal, anything to, like, keep the studio together. But no, it's just fuck you. You know, we got all of you to move, then have to go through COVID, and now we're, like, laying you off. Like, it's such a terrible way, shitty way to treat those developers. Never mind that the game doesn't come out. Like, yeah, that's not great, but like, not having, like, a piece of creativity on whatever make its way out because of some suit somewhere seems it's not, you know, cost effective or what have you. Fine, but, like, give it to the studio then and let it be on their head if the game doesn't come out instead of arbitrarily shutting the studio down. Anyway, that's not the only game that was cancelled though. Rare's Everwild was also cancelled following Xbox job cuts. So Rare are a UK-based studio. Everwild was effectively their next game since Sea of Thieves. They haven't really put out a new game since then. So Everwild was supposed to be the next thing there. We never really saw any actual gameplay of Everwild. It was only ever kind of vibes. There's going to be some kind of open... There's going to be like a kind of Sea of Thieves type thing. But like more of like a nature focus with like druids and rangers and like tending to the wildlife kind of thing, as opposed to like Sea of Thieves that's more of a just pirates. But yeah, we never saw like any gameplay or anything of Everwild. But that's been cancelled as well. That was in development since 2019 maybe. Everwild was said to be the next large game from Rare. I don't think Rare have put out a smaller game even since then. I could be wrong, but I don't think they have. Anyway, allegedly, February of this year, Phil Spencer was over at Rare looking at Everwild and, was talking about how he thought it was in a good shape and what have you. It has been a while, and we've been able to give those teams time in what they're doing. Okay, which is good, and still have a portfolio like we have. It's like a dream that Matt Booty and I have had for a long time, so it's finally good to be there. We can give those teams time, which clearly is not true, because they've got laid off. Now, saying all of this, I do feel that as much as I dislike Phil Spencer and Matt Booty and what have you, I do feel like a lot of this is coming down from on high. Sundar Pichai and what have you saying, we want number go up, and we want number go up, and the easiest way to do that is to fire a bunch of people. So I do feel like their hands are forced a little bit. And of the games that they have chosen to cancel, they're probably the most obvious ones, because they've been in development a very long time and have had basically nothing to show for it. But this is another thing where you could have just given it to Rare. Like, just let Rare do their own thing. And like, in general, I think they should cut Rare loose anyway, because they've done nothing with them. Since we'll get onto this actually in a second. Sticking with Rare, Banjo-Kazooie Sea of Thieves director leaves Rare after 35 years following the Everwild cancellation. So this is Greg Mayles, who's responsible for pretty much everything you know about Rare. All of the googly-eyed characters basically you can attribute them to him. More than 35 years at Rare. Like, he's been there almost as long as I've been alive. Like, that's insane. That is an insane amount of knowledge, of industry experience to just let go. Like, they could have done anything. Just keep fucking Everwild if it's just to keep this guy around. Like, that's so much industry knowledge. And the team he's built up around him over that time, because he's not the only one who's gone. Executive producer Louise O'Connor, who's also been there for a long time. She's been there since Conker's Bad Fur Day on the Nintendo 64. She's also leaving, also because of the Everwild cancellation. Now, they're saying leaving. It is not clear if they are voluntarily leaving the company or if they have been laid off, basically. And if it's a case that they've been laid off, you fucking idiots. Really. Like, if it's a case that they're deciding that, we don't want to work for Xbox anymore when they can just arbitrarily cancel our game, we're just going to leave, fine, principled decision, well for them. But if you're laying them off, like, such a experienced team and an experienced creator who's like responsible for, hang on, there's a list of like things he's responsible for: Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, Banjo-Kazooie 1 and 2, Grab by the Ghoulies and Viva Pinata. You may not know those two games, but they're both also very good games. But the Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, incredible platformers. Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, incredible collectathon games. He's also responsible for Sea of Thieves on top of that. But I do think it's kind of highlighted here that they made all of those games before Microsoft bought them. So Microsoft then acquired them They acquired them for the 360, I think. And then they had to make Banjo-Kazooie 3, which is nuts and bolts, which was not well received. All of the Kinect shit, like Rare were just in the Kinect mines for a really long time, until they managed to get Sea of Thieves out. And then I think largely Microsoft have left them alone for the Rare shit. Anyway, founded in 1985. Actually, Rare is as old as I am, which is nuts. Like, they're as old as Super Mario. Like, that's how old the company is. And he's been there for like almost all of it. This is an insane loss for the company that they're just letting happen. Anyway, Battletoads, Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye, 007, Banjo-Kazooie, like, these are some incredible games. And to let like the designer or designing team around those go, some stupid shit happening here. Anyway, but they're not the only stupid shit happening. ZeniMax Online Studios MMO, codenamed Blackbird, also cancelled amid the layoffs, and then company president Matt Furore is deciding to step down because of it, so that's cool. So that's been in development since 2018. It was effectively going to be ZeniMax Online's next game since The Elder Scrolls Online. and that is a long time ago. It's 2014, so it's been nearly 10 years. I don't think the game has been in development that long. Like 2018, it is still a long time. So we're still talking Everwild, Perfect Dark, in and around the same time started development with this game and also have nothing really to show. Certainly nothing public. That Perfect Dark vertical slice thing was bullshit. There's no way that was a real thing. And we've like never even heard about this game. It was never announced in the first place. And Everwild has never had any gameplay to show. Like, it has been long believed that those games were in development hell and probably restarted a bunch of times. So again, it makes sense for those games to be cancelled. What doesn't make sense is to lay off somebody with that much experience at the studio and that much experience of delivering banger games, to then also shut a studio that you had only really opened, and you had a team that's been able to work itself up from 0 staff up to like a working AAA studio, working maybe Perfect Dark never came out, etc. Anyway, Matt Furore has decided they will step down, going to leave the studio after 18 years with them. So that's another person who's been there for a very long time, that they're effectively just saying fuck you to. But wait, there's more. Romero Games making layoffs after Microsoft cancels project funding. So Romero Games are based in Ireland. It's kind of nuts. They're on the West Coast, over in Galway. Anyway, Romero Games has seemingly laid off a number of employees after suddenly losing project funding. This is believed to have been a direct result of Microsoft's latest layoff spree. John Romero, you may or not be familiar, potentially. It's like almost prehistory at this point for video games, but one of like co-creators of Doom. He's been around a long time. Anyway, posted on Blue Sky about the layoffs. Did not name Microsoft directly, but the timing suggests that it is probably Microsoft, and then other people at the studio talking about the layoffs did directly mention Microsoft. So, like, Romero maybe has a bit more diplomatic savvy, shall we say, to not name the company directly, since it was never officially announced that Microsoft was funding their next game. Anyway, we have some difficult news to share. Last night we learned that our publisher has cancelled funding for our game, along with several other unannounced projects at other studios, which you've already heard of. Again, Perfect Dark, Everwild, whatever ZeniMax's MMO was going to be. This was a strategic decision made at a high level within the publisher, well above our visibility or control. We deeply wish there had been anything we could have done to prevent this outcome. I kind of feel like there was. Not for them, really. It's just extremely shitty behavior from Microsoft in general, that they couldn't have talked to the studio and got some kind of, what if we do a co-publishing deal? What if, can we buy the IP off of you, or something like that? Can we rent the license it? Something, anything to keep the studio going, anything to keep the project going, what have you. Anyway, then from CEO Brenda Romero, many of us have worked together for more than a decade, some for over 20 years, and it's an extremely difficult day because they're losing a bunch of people, and it's not been confirmed yet, but there is rumors that the studio itself is shutting down. So we don't necessarily know. Anyway, a number of employees impacted did lay the blame firmly on Microsoft Store. There's a couple of quotes there from them as well. So while John Romero didn't, or Romero Games' PR team didn't specifically call out Microsoft, the employees had less, shall we say, tact, and did. Anyway, that's again a kind of a big blow. It's a little bit more of like a local thing because Ireland, Irish, that's where I'm from. It's where I live, and there's not a huge video game industry in Ireland. Like, calling it an industry would be a misnomer. It's like 3 studios I can think of, maybe 4, possibly, and now we're down 1 with Romero Games, maybe. Even at that, all of those studios that I'm aware of are like mobile games. And very few of them, if any, make like PC. Definitely don't make console games. Like, this would have been one of the few like standout things. Potentially would have started an industry initiative from our government, as the Irish government gives nothing to the arts. like it's lip service, and never mind video game. They're not even aware that there are studios. Like they give nothing. Any of the other areas in like the US, obviously Silicon Valley is heavy into tech, but there are parts of like Canada, Montreal, Toronto, they give like good subsidies to video game studios. UK have things in Bath, I think, is like a major area for that. There's places in Italy that are like a major like zones, and like a couple of different studios are all clustered together. It's that kind of stuff is how you get like development going. And never mind like the Irish government shit about giving money to anybody, really. They just hoard it. They get in great corporate profits because all of the big US tech firms have their HQ in Ireland for tax reasons. And they get a lot of tax in from them, but they don't fucking spend any of it. They just sit on it. It's extremely frustrating. Anyway, this isn't a bash the Irish government show. Moving on. But wait, there's more. Turn 10 Studios loses nearly half of its staff, so this one isn't a game cancellation. Maybe. At least not officially. So Turn 10 are the studio responsible for the Forza Motorsport series. So that's the more sim style Forza games. That's the one where you're on an actual racetrack. It's a bit closer to Gran Turismo kind of thing, rather than Forza Horizon, which is a lot closer to Burnout. It's more of an arcade thing and is arguably the more popular one. Anyway, the company was decimated, which is not correct. It's way more than decimated. It's been halved. It's been bisected, maybe. Anyway, unclear where things go from here, especially with what's currently in development. So it is an assumption there that they basically don't have enough people to make the next Forza Motorsport. So there's an assumption that Xbox might be saying that we're just going to go with Forza Horizon from now on. And that Turn 10 Studios will effectively become a support studio for Forza Horizon. Now, they do already help out Forza Horizon, but at the same time, they work on their own Forza game, which is Forza Motorsport. So it's the assumption is that they've effectively downsized the studio to turn them into a support studio to Playground Games, who make the Forza Horizon games. Anyway, I don't think there was... What was the last Forza Horizon game? 6, I think, maybe. And I don't think there's been a Motorsport since. I think the way they did it was like it was a Motorsport Horizon, Motorsport Horizon, Motorsport Horizon. You know, they like nestled, tagged off each other. I don't follow the Forza series, so I'm not sure, but I kind of assume that's how it worked. Anyway, I don't remember hearing of another Forza Motorsport, and as it sounds now, there won't be one. But wait, we're still not done. Multiple Call of Duty studios hit by Xbox layoffs. This one is a little bit more developing because it's a US holiday weekend. We don't have firm numbers about who exactly has been hit, but it's things like Raven Software probably been taken down, Treyarch, Sledgehammer Games, like any of the bigger Call of Duty studios. Now, saying Call of Duty studios is a little bit difficult because, well, one, it seems to be difficult for me to say in the first place, but there are so many studios working on Call of Duty now. The Call of Duty mines, basically. Activision, like, if your last game didn't sell really, really well, or even if it did sell really, really well, fuck you. You're gonna go work in the Call of Duty mines anyway. So there are tons of studios working on Call of Duty. So this is almost just like saying Activision hit by Xbox layoffs in some ways. Again, because they're US based and because this was a slightly later story, even though it says July 2nd, it was a slightly later one. We don't have firm numbers on that one. We do have the numbers for like the Initiative, mostly because the studio was closed down and because Perfect Dark is a fairly high profile game. For Rare, they need to like say ahead of time because it's a UK based studio, as we were talking about with like Mindbreak, fucking Mind's Eye. Mecha Break is coming up later, so I was thinking about that. Anyway, you need to tell them ahead of time. You need to give them like a month's notice or something. So it'll probably be a while for that one. ZeniMax Online, I think, is Italian. I think they're based in Italy. I could be wrong. I could be thinking of somebody else, but I think they're based in the EU. Romero Games, Irish, again, EU rules. You need to tell them ahead of time. Even though they didn't tell them ahead of time, so there's going to be like either this will be a long drawn out process for Romero Games, or they'll have a court date with Microsoft for just dropping layoffs on them. Anyway, that is it though for the news around the layoffs. We don't know too much else. I imagine we'll hear a little bit more about it this week on any more news concerning the exact numbers and what have you. So we're gonna bring up these last two kind of opinion pieces. This first one, Microsoft's darkest day in gaming since the last one. So this is kind of highlighting that this isn't the first time Microsoft has made a bunch of layoffs. Again, this is the fourth one in 2 years. Substantial layoffs, kind of reminding you about Tango, reminding you about Arcane. Microsoft has a history of laying off people and so on. All of this is at a time when Microsoft has announced an overall revenue increase in its latest results, including an 8% increase in Xbox content and services. Frankly, it's not a great look. At best, it's callous. At worst, it betrays the lack of a coherent strategy. Microsoft, in general, is doing very well. Like, they are making obscene profits. Most of that is from enterprise software, Microsoft 365, that kind of shit. How much of it is coming from Xbox? How much of it is coming from the cloud stuff? As far as I'm aware, cloud is not doing as well as it used to. And Microsoft are pumping a lot of money into generative AI, which it's a bubble that's gonna burst any day now. So yes, they're making a lot of money, but also I do feel, and you kind of have to go a little further afield to other tech blogs and stuff like that to get this kind of information and what have you, but I think Microsoft are aware that Gen AI isn't going to make the kind of return that they want, and this may just be trimming the fat ahead of time. But the problem here is that they're not trimming fat, they're trimming like vital pieces of the Xbox gaming architecture, if you like. You know, substantial industry knowledge they're getting rid of here. It's substantial goodwill from like players they're getting rid of. Because they're not going to handle like Perfect Dark cancelled. Rabble, you know? Rare have their fanboys and cancelling one of their games. Rabble. You know, it's not going to go well for them. Anyway, some of this opinion piece by Lewis Backwood from GamesIndustry.biz, kind of talking about Microsoft's studio buying spree, how they were buying up a lot of studios so they'd have a steady supply of Game Pass subscription services. I did hear that the head or founder possibly of Arcane, Leon, and Sven Vicky were talking about it over the weekend, something about Game Pass. I have not had a chance to read up on that, so that's why it won't be in today's show. But they've had some things to say about Game Pass, let's just say. Anyway, so in order to make back the money that they've spent, so it's like $80 billion, $80 billion, the entirety of their studio buying spree. And again, almost all of that was Activision. But to make up for that, they would need almost 70 million people paying for Game Pass Ultimate for $20 a month for 5 years. They are not even remotely close to that. Right now, the last time they shared news was February 2024, and they only had 34 million. They had half of that. They would need to sustain close to 100 million people for 5 years at a very high subscription tier price just to make that money back. Never mind making a profit on it. Like, in hindsight, the $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard looks reckless. Yeah, I said it at the time. It was like, how the fuck are you going to make that money back? Microsoft are not going to be happy with just losing $70 billion. They're going to want it back, and they're going to want interest on top. And you're telling them that it will take 5 years for them to receive that return? Just to get it back? Never mind make a return of profit. That's not going to happen. Although it is interesting that it's 80 billion, because that's how much they're putting into Gen AI this year. So it's like they don't mind spending the money in some places, but do mind spending the money in other places. Anyway, now the question then becomes how will that debit in the ledger be accounted for? We don't really know. the Eye of Sauron from Microsoft, kind of basically saying, which kind of what I've been saying, is we want that money now, make it back somehow. And the assumption, I think, from a lot of people in the community is that Xbox is probably going to stop doing hardware, because that's obviously a big loss leader for them. So this is where the Xbox Anywhere thing has been coming from, and you're just going to slap the Xbox logo onto an Asus ROG, or they're going to slap it onto the Meta Quest or what have you, because like there are no Xbox first-party VR games. Like this is just a weird partnership between Meta and Xbox. Anyway. And then, like, a lot of this is stuff that I had already been saying as well. It's like a tragic waste of talent, losing Greg Mayles, 35 years, losing the people from the initiative. A distinct lack of communication from senior management means these cuts are simply part of a disordered retreat. We don't know because they're not talking about it, and they're likely not going to talk about it, which obviously isn't great. Anyway, the second opinion piece is from Polygon's Ollie Welsh. And in this one, they're kind of giving you a little bit more of a history lesson on how Microsoft have kind of historically been very bad at managing studios. I know, try to be shocked. So Microsoft has simply never been any good at running game studios. That are talking about here, Everwild and Perfect Dark, and again saying something that I kind of was saying as well, which is they should arguably have been cancelled a long time ago. They've been going for a long time, had nothing to show for themselves for like 6 years, 7 years. Yeah, I mean, it's not great, but arguably maybe it makes sense. This is unfortunately a sadly familiar story. All you have to do is look at Lionhead Studios. It's the same kind of situation. Microsoft acquired them after them making some like really impressive games, Black and White, Fable, a couple of other things. 10 years later, though, the studio was closed down because they had Microsoft having them chase fads like Milo and the Kinect shit and what have you. Rare was the same situation. They were already really well known for making very good platformer collectathon type games with Donkey Kong Country, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Banjo-Kazooie, that kind of thing. And instead they had to make Kinect shit when they bought Rare. And like Rare kind of bought themselves a bit of leeway with Sea of Thieves, which I forget now historically, but I think it was like they were working on it somewhat in secret because they knew Microsoft wouldn't let them work on it. That was like the rumor of the story. I don't know if that's actually true, but that was always the rumor. And it seems that Rare has kind of maybe kept themselves afloat just with Sea of Thieves at this point. Pun somewhat intended. If you want to go even further back, you talk about Bungie. You know, they brought Bungie in. They got Halo, single-handedly made Xbox's reputation among gamers with the Halo series. Then effectively made Bungie just the Halo studio. Just get them to churn out sequels. Bungie didn't want to do that, so they bought themselves out in 2007. Then they pushed the Halo series onto 343 Industries, who have kind of just buckled under the weight of expectation there. Was never allowed to develop its own identity. 343 was always just the guys who were caretaking Halo. You know, they never had their own thing. Arguably still, I mean, they were rebranded to just Halo Studios, so I mean, that obviously doesn't help. Anyway, it's kind of interesting that Ollie Welsh points this one out, though. It's impossible to imagine Sony allowing the same thing to happen to Naughty Dog. Is that it did, kinda. Now, we never really got a public idea of what was going to happen with The Last of Us's live service thing, because they cancelled it before it ever saw the light of day, but they were at least thinking about it. They were at least thinking about making Naughty Dog make a game that they're not known for, or a type of game that they're not known for, instead of like the... Okay, I mean, they were sort of known for Crash Bandicoot, but they're not really known for that anymore. Now they're known for like prestige action-adventure things, like Uncharted, Last of Us, what have you. You know, Lionhead was known for probably Fable, arguably at that point, but they were also known for some like management sim stuff, like Black and White, like I mentioned before, or Proteus. Not Proteus. Proteus is something else. Rare were known for their platformer, mascot platformer type things, and they had them make not those games. It is somewhat interesting that Bungie were kind of known for first-person shooters with Marathon at the time, and then Halo, and then they actually were like, yeah, okay, keep making Halo. and it was Bungie who were like, no, we want to make something else. So like in both ways, they were somewhat, forcing them to do things that they didn't want to make, and again, somewhat forcing them to make things that they didn't want to make. Like, it's the kind of same situation here. How much of the Last of Us live service thing was Sony mandated versus Naughty Dog mandated? I get the feeling it was more Jim Ryan mandated than anything else, but we won't know. They're never going to mention it, but I don't think it's impossible to imagine Sony doing it, because they absolutely did. But this kind of forcing studios to make things that they're not really well known for is something we've already seen with EA as well, trying to force BioWare to make Anthem, Activision taking studios that historically make other types of games and having them make Call of Duty instead. Like, it's Microsoft aren't the only people doing it. It's not unique to them. Anyway, there's some, again, speculation here that, burned by its experience with Bungie, Lionhead, and Rare, that Xbox decided to retreat from first-party development. So for a long while, there were no real first-party developed games. There's a question on, I think, kind of from not the 360 necessarily, but from like Xbox One, Xbox Series, or Xbox One in particular. It was kind of, what are Xbox's first-party games? They don't really have any. Like, they kind of had Halo, but again, it's not made by Bungie anymore. They had Forza, I suppose, but like, racing games are somewhat niche. Anyway, that was all under Don Matrick, who was not a good boss for Xbox. It's not like Phil Spencer's been any better, really, but at least more games have been made under his watch rather than Don Matrick's. So arguably, Phil Spencer's, acquisition spree was like an overreaction to Don Matrick's retreat from development. And they have been successful in some ways. Like, Obsidian Entertainment has been a good purchase for them, as frustrating as it is to me, because I want to play those games. Obsidian are a studio I quite have a lot of respect for, and I want to play more of their games, and it's frustrating to me that they're somewhat console exclusive in some ways. Playground Games, Forza Horizon obviously did really well, but now they're forcing them to make Fable, which again, they're maybe not suited to, and Fable has been in development for a long time. So we're possibly looking at another Lionhead situation with them. Anyway, was the goal of the spending spree meant to turn Xbox into a first-party powerhouse with system-selling exclusives? Well, it seems like they may have failed on that front, because, they've cancelled a lot of those games, and their first-party exclusive are largely not exclusive anymore. Because we're seeing a lot of Xbox games make their way over to PlayStation, make their way out to PC, and so on, make their way over to Switch. And I do think a lot of that is Microsoft higher-ups saying that, hey, maybe we don't want to be a hardware company anymore. Like, historically, Microsoft are not a hardware company. They're a software company. And them getting into the video game industry through hardware was always considered a bit of a weird one. When the original Xbox was launched, it was like, what are you doing? Kind of thing. You're a software company, you should focus on the software. But anyway, like, a similar situation was with Sony. Sony historically are like the other way around, a hardware company, not really as well known for their software, but they were getting into making video games, and it somewhat has worked out for them. Anyway, Microsoft has consistently and repeatedly over decades shown it has no aptitude for running the creative industry it just bought half of. That's not great. That's a great line, but it's not a great feeling. Anyway, if the mismanagement doesn't end, there will be worse to come. Yes, I would imagine so. Anyway, moving on. We're going to talk about some other things and not talk about the Xbox stuff. I imagine we'll learn a little bit more about that later. Anyway, outside of that news, some update stuff. So Code Vein, Bandai Namco had a showcase that was largely stuff we'd already seen. This Code Vein 2 information, we're seeing a little bit more gameplay, I think, than what we saw at the Summer Game Fest. While it is ostensibly a sequel to the original Code Vein, I don't think you need to have played the original to get anything out of it. Code Vein is a kind of anime vampire Dark Souls kind of thing, and it looks like Code Vein 2 is much the same, but we have gold blood for some reason. I don't know, maybe they just saw Elden Ring and all the gold and they wanted in on that or something. there is some kind of time travel shenanigans going on in the game as well. And that's kind of all we got out of this trailer specifically. Anyway, there were some other things at that showcase, but again, nothing we didn't already know. There's a bit more of Blood of the Dawnwalker, but again, nothing new. Anyway, moving on from there, we have a game announcement from... I forget the name of the studio. D Games? Something like that. Anyway, it's Full Metal Schoolgirl. This is from the developers from Earth Defense Force, which is a very kind of satirical, hey, what if Earth was invaded by giant space bugs, basically, and you were part of an infantry squad that has to take them on as they are invading like big cities and stuff. It's very dumb and very B-movie, C-movie almost hilarity, and it does seem like Full Metal Schoolgirl is going to be a similar kind of thing. It reminds me a little bit of Lollipop Chainsaw. Has the same kind of vibe to it. It is obviously like anime fan service there as well. You just saw like the doctor had impossibly large breasts and so on. I do think it'll be like kind of funny more than anything else. Anyway, I don't think it has a release date or anything. I think it's like D3 Publishers. No, that's the publisher. Who's the developer? Oh, Ukes. Okay, that does make sense. Okay, anyway. I didn't say. I think it's next year at some point. Or is it no? Is it later this year? Yeah, it's later this year. So end of October. Kind of an interesting one. Some Xbox news that's actually maybe a little bit better, but Helldivers 2 is making its way to Xbox. And that's kind of a big deal, actually, because it's a Sony game, ostensibly. Now, strictly speaking, it's a Sony published game. It's not a Sony first-party developed game. The Sony don't own Arrowhead Studios, so it's kind of like a second-party situation. I don't know how that works. Anyway, the point is, it's technically a PlayStation game, but also technically not a PlayStation game. So it's a bit of a... Could almost look at this as Sony dipping their toe into maybe a multi-platform situation, because it does seem like Xbox is retreating from the hardware battle, and in that case, Sony don't really have... I mean, yeah, you could say they're competing with Nintendo, but not really. Anyway, end of August for Helldivers 2 on Xbox, and it will be cross-play, so that'll be interesting. Anyway, moving on. BioWare's Anthem finally shut down in early 2026. I thought it was already shut down. Honestly, like legitimately thought it was already shut down, but apparently it wasn't. Anyway, BioWare's exosuit shooter Anthem will finally be taken offline in early of next year. After careful consideration, we'll be sunsetting Anthem on January 12th of 2026. Careful consideration of, wait, that game's still going? Really? Is anyone playing it? No? Yeah, okay, I thought not. All right, let's shut it down then. We deeply appreciate your dedication, passion, and support over the years, and we'd like to thank you for that. Come on. Come on, my guy. Anyway, also letting us know that the shutdown isn't resulting in any layoffs, which is an odd thing to add to the press release, but considering the other news from this week, all the Xbox layoffs, I guess it does let them know that, like, BioWare isn't getting any additional layoffs because of Anthem. Mostly because I don't think anybody was working on it. Anyway. But that doesn't really matter because EA have already laid off a bunch of people from BioWare. Anyway, Anthem will cease to be playable since it's an it's an online-only game. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in the community things situation. But yeah, it's another kind of game preservation thing. And as much as Anthem is like not a good game, you know, is Anthem good? No. That's their review. But it is an important piece of video game history, and it'd be like, here's how not to do. Here's how not to have a studio known for single-player, dense narrative RPGs and have them make a action looter shooter instead. Here's how not to do that. Anyway, assuming you don't already own it, you'll need to pay for an EA Play subscription to try Anthem on PC before its song is sung. Yeah, if you want to, you have like 160 days, 192 days as of whenever this went up. Although you actually have less time than that because on PC it'll be gone in like a month for some reason. Anyway, Last thing, 9 Years of Shadows. It's making its way over to PlayStation and Xbox. So we played this on the channel a good while ago, and I think I played it on Switch, PC possibly. I don't remember. And I got irrationally angry at this game. I think it's a good game. I just don't like its healing mechanic. And if you don't remember, you can't pick up like healing items. You can only heal when you lose all of your health. You lose all of your health, and then you get like a active reload thing that lets you heal yourself. And if you fuck it up, you basically are just going to die immediately. You won't die definitely. You'll get a little bit of health back, but you won't get enough back to like finish the fight kind of thing. You'll just, in a boss fight anyway, it's almost impossible. You pretty much have to flawlessly fight the boss to win. And that's why I got really angry at the game. But otherwise it's a good game. Maybe they've made some adjustments since then. Like, it's been a while, and I did see a couple of things there in the trailer that weren't in the original game. So, you know, maybe they've made some changes. Anyway, 9 Years of Shadows makes its way to console at the end of this month. Over on the Epic Games Store, free games this week. First one is Backpack Hero, which is a kind of interesting kind of roguelike kind of thing. So you're kind of taking the grid-based inventory system from Resident Evil 4 and turning it into like a combat thing. So depending on how many items you have in your backpack and the order they're in and the like configuration arrangement they're in and so on, you can make like different attacks and stuff like that. There is another game that does it a little bit more automatically, and I forget what that one's called, but it's a similar type of game. Anyway, that's Backpack Hero, and then the other game is Figment, which is a kind of action-adventure thing that's based on a little bit music situations. And I think that's making its way to like Switch or something this week. Anyway, it's Figment, and Figment 2 will be a free game next week. So, you know, if you like it, you might like the sequel after that. Still, we've got some more Xbox news, but not the bad kind. Anyway, Xbox Game Pass, because it's the beginning of the month, so the first wave of Xbox Game Pass for July. Nothing really massively outstanding because a lot of these games have been out for a while, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4 is probably the big standout because that is a launch title. And I think Minami Lane is also a launch title, but the rest of them have been around for a good while. Ultimate Chicken Horse is a fantastic party game. High on Life is the kind of Rick and Morty first-person shooter. The Ascent is a really good isometric cyberpunk kind of shooter. I think it's a really good game. Much better with friends. And then two of the Avmana JRPGs are both very, very good. Legend of Mana, Trials of Mana. Anyway, like, they're good games. It's just they've been out for a while. Anyway, and Tony's Cox is it's a remake or a remaster. Anyway, those are some of the games you can play soon. What if you wanted to play something right now? You can play Mecha Break, which is, I think it's in alpha or maybe in early access or something on PC right now. I'm not sure if it's actually on its full launch. So Mecha Break is a kind of, well, it's a mech game, but it is a bit of like a free-to-play with microtransactions kind of thing. And from what I've seen from the reviews, the actual combat is a lot of fun, but there's a lot of waiting around for combat, and the microtransactions are extremely in your face. You know, they're very upfront, very prominent in the game for, you know, like, spend money now, give me all your money right now. So depending on how much you can, you know, ignore that kind of thing, I guess you might enjoy Mecha Break. I don't know. I have found increasingly that I just don't like seeing that kind of stuff in game. I think I find it immersion breaking, whatever. Maybe it's purist of me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just used to games not having that kind of thing. When I see it, I get really pissed off about it. Like, Diablo 4 was added to PlayStation Plus last week, and I've started playing it, and it really does just remind me a lot, or too often really, like, taking me out of the game, that a lot of things that you would have expected from like end game stuff in the old Diablos is just in the shop now. You know, like cool armor sets or stuff that has like interesting effects and things that would have been like rewards for quests and what have you. It's just, no, you just gotta pay for it now, and it's extremely disappointing because I think back to Diablo 2. it just wasn't like that. Diablo 3, in some cases, yeah, they wanted it to be like that, but it didn't go that way. And then Diablo 4, I guess they got there. They finally got what they wanted. Anyway, Mecha Break. And then over on PlayStation side of things, and on PC and Xbox as well, I think, Dead of Darkness, which is a pixel art sort of survival horror kind of thing. The reviews have been decent enough for it. It's clearly like an RPG Maker thing. I'm gonna kind of skip ahead. Actually, I did want to look at this for a minute, because like the pixel art and like the really almost going for realism portraits, does that seem wrong? Also, I'm kind of a little concerned that these might be generative AI. I'm not sure if they are. I don't think they are, but I could be wrong. Anyway, otherwise it's got, puzzles and survival horror shenanigans. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, Dead of Darkness. Not many new releases this week. Anyway, we're not done with industry bullshit. So unfortunately, it's time to talk again about the worst part of video games, the video game industry. So we're going to start with two somewhat lengthy pieces. This first one from Rob Fahey, GamesIndustry.biz, is talking about news coming out of a recent study from the Circana market data, which is basically showing that the 18 to 25 demographic of young men are spending less money on video games historically. The average weekly spend is down by almost 25% year on year, which is a pretty significant drop. Now, partially this is readjustment for pandemic times when the numbers were like historically very high because everyone was locked up and the only real means of entertainment was video games. But anyway, but obviously a lot of this is, hey, look around at how expensive everything is now. So in one way, it's not surprising that the money is down. But in another way, it is a little bit, because video games have historically been recession-proof. And Rob Fahey points out here that this upcoming recession that I think people are somewhat feeling is probably going to happen soon, if not already happening, this is the first time it will really affect video games. Anyway, so spending on video games among I can't read that. Among young American consumers is dropping off hard, with average weekly spend down by almost a quarter year over year. Overall, belt tightening in the 18-24 demographic, but games are the most hard-hit segment in terms of spending decline. So spending is down in general, but video games are down a little bit more than you might expect. There's also a notable spending decline with older consumers as well. So even video game players over 24, me, are also spending less on video games, which is true. I am, in fact, spending less on video games. Anyway, so talking about here that, there's a general belt tightening, somewhat inevitable, that people, find that they don't have as much disposable income after all of their bills are paid. They might not have any disposable income in some cases. Many workers have seen their real income fall as price rises eat all of their earnings growth and then some. So yes, people are scrutinizing their budget, trying to find out what can be cut, and this time it seems like games might be on the chopping block. This upcoming recession that may or may not be happening, but is almost certainly going to be happening, is probably the first time the games business will actually experience a real recession. Previously, we'll take the 2008 financial crisis. While that did hit video games, and it did hit like the console side of things, the AAA side of things, it was largely kind of wiped out by the smartphone side of things. Smartphone gaming, huge boom in and around that time. So a lot of publishers who had also diversified into smartphone games, mobile gaming, they didn't really feel it. Other times, like the kind of recessions we saw around COVID and what have you, again, video games did really well during COVID times. But now, it's likely they won't. And Rob Fahey kind of attributes that to the general narrative around video games right now, which is people think they're too expensive and that they're not getting the kind of value that they used to. And whether it's true or not, that's the belief, and that's what's driving consumer spending, or lack of consumer spending in this case. Consumers also seem to have soured on video games' other great superpower in recessions, which is namely their value proposition. So the idea was a game console or a gaming PC and a video game itself might be, expensive upfront, but arguably it's the best value for money of any other form of entertainment when you considered like hours of engagement, hours of entertainment versus how expensive it was. Music CD, album, almost maybe equivalent, I don't know, a film ticket is extraordinarily expensive for only maybe 2 hours of entertainment, if the film's even any good. And, if you watch the film a second time, you already know what's going to happen, whereas if you play a video game, you might get something different out of it the next time you play it, and games are typically much lengthier than that kind of thing, etc., etc. But it seems that Circana's data shows exactly the opposite things happening among younger consumers, which is that they don't feel that the number of hours of engagement or number of hours of entertainment matches up with the amount of money they're required to spend on it, basically. They're not getting the value for their money. Chuck, it's kind of hard to argue, to be honest. Anyway, it is not a coincidence that games are getting hit especially hard relative to other consumer sectors right at the point when a narrative about games being expensive and overpriced has reached a fever pitch. So we've already seen like the games are now $80 kind of thing. That's already one issue. Other issue being that like consoles are not dropping in price as they age. Some of them are actually going up in price. Sony recently put up the price of a PS5, so that's fun. PC graphics cards are not getting any better, but the cost of them is going up. Now, we know the reason for it, because they're being eaten up by generative AI, and before that they were being eaten up by crypto bros, and before that it was being eaten up by blockchain bros. But the point is, PC graphic card prices are really high, and there's like practically no difference between this year's model and last year's model, yet the price difference is astronomical kind of thing. Anyway, and then of course there's the AAA thing where games have gone from $60, $70, $80, and maybe GTA 6 might attempt $100. We don't know. I don't think they will, but there's always the worry that they'll probably pull it off. Anyway, you have got the technical argument. You can be technically right, which in this case, unfortunately, is the absolute worst kind of right, which is a Futurama joke. I appreciate it. Anyway, that adjusted for inflation, video games and video game consoles are actually lower than historical prices. So if you like adjust it for inflation, a SNES game would be way more expensive than a video game right now. The problem is you're not also adjusting people's pay for inflation, because that hasn't really changed much. It's been quite flat. Small fluctuations every now and again. But in general, people's pay hasn't changed. So it's not a truth that feels remotely real at all if you're a consumer. If you were to tell them, hey, games have actually never been cheaper, adjusted for inflation, asterisk, citation required. But they're feeling that many people's salaries, especially those of young people, have not actually kept pace with inflation. So inflation adjusted is a bit of a misleading calculus. Again, adjusted for inflation, we make significantly less than our parents did, and then their parents did, and so on. What fraction of an average person's disposable discretionary income does this cost? So we then have the issue of what I said ahead of time, which was people have less disposable income now because the prices of things have gone up, and they're going to say inflation is the reason, but it's not. I mean, it is in some cases, but they've also added more on top of it. And they have. There's like a nice dollop of greed on top of that inflation reason. And our pay has not gone up that way. Our pay may, if you're in an okay employer, they might adjust it for inflation, but they're not going to also throw on a dollop of quality of life improvement. They're not going to fucking do that. So what might have been like 10% of your disposable income went to a video game. I'm just spitballing numbers. I have no idea. 50% went to your rent, and like another 20% went to your food, and then you had another 10% for some entertainment and maybe do a video game, and then the rest of it went to your savings. Maybe. I don't know. But now it's like 90% of it goes to your rent. And the rest has to go to food, or you'll starve. You have 0% for video games. Like, that's just the situation they're in. And there's no amount of the video game industry saying, but inflation, but historically, it's never been cheaper. It's like, they don't care. Don't care. I have no money. What do you want from me? Anyway, regardless of historical prices comparisons, games are seen as inexpensive right now, and that belief is what will drive consumers' choices as they choose spending cuts in tough times. So you can be technically correct, but it won't matter because it's vibes, and the vibe right now is games are too expensive. So that's going to be a problem. Anyway, that's one opinion piece. There's a much longer one here, so we're not going to go into this one too much. But I do think this story is probably going to be buried because of all of the Xbox news. But anyway, what is wrong with AAA games? The development of the next Battlefield has answers. So this is from Ars Technica, Samuel Axon at Ars Technica. Ars Technica, as the name might suggest, is not necessarily a video game focused blog. It's more of a tech in general focused thing. So a lot of this is, or a little bit of it really, is explaining video game terminology, video game terms, and a little bit of history of video games and stuff like that to a broader audience. And I do think it's interesting to look at and what things that you might take as gospel and like everybody knows this, and it's like, no, this is a very video game thing. Anyway, so there's a bit of a history of Battlefield and what's happening with the new Battlefield kind of thing. We go into a little bit of a history here of it. It's like 23 years since the very first Battlefield game. Many people who love the games from that era are getting frustrated because AAA games now are just shit. Sources close to the project say, like, big budget, clashes in developers, major disruptions, team members fearful they're going to lose their job, and so on. Companies made like big structural changes, and basically it's trying to tell you how the games industry has changed massively since possibly you were a boy. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it is a fairly lengthy article. The one thing I did want to look at, though, this one, because this is the one you'll probably hear about, and you mightn't hear about the rest of it. But it is like a really good like history of what's going on with Battlefield and historically what it was like, and then EA pushing for it to kind of compete with Call of Duty changed it a lot. How Battlefield 2042 really fucked them up in some way, in some cases, and there's like there's an interesting piece later on how there's like a culture clash because DICE are EU based, Swedish, and leadership in EA is obviously US. So I think anybody who has worked with EU US teams will know, one, time zones, big problem. Getting meetings together, you're either going to be working very early or very late, and in the case of EA and DICE, it's both. You have people working ridiculous hours, crunch as a mandate, but on top of that, it's the frustration between US focus on the next quarterly goals and what have you, and DICE's focus is more, hey, we just want to make a good game, like. That's it. Like that's our deal. Anyway, so I do encourage you to read like the full thing. Like I do think it is very good. Anyway, but the one I wanted to focus on here is EA's executive leadership believes Battlefield has the potential to stand toe-to-toe with them being Call of Duty, Fortnite, if the right calls are made and enough was invested. So this is, hey, if we just throw all of the money at this and we fucking micromanage the shit out of it, then we can make all of the money. Somehow. We'll somehow get everyone to decide to stop playing Fortnite and play Battlefield instead. They'll somehow not look at all of their skins and all the V-Bucks they've spent in Fortnite, and they'll go, and move over to Battlefield. Yeah, that'll happen. Okay, anyway. A lofty player target is set for Glacier, which is what the new Battlefield is codenamed. Anyway, 100 million players over a set period of time that includes post-launch. They expect the new Battlefield to hit 100 million players. Now, the exact amount of time that they're giving for that is not written out. It's not given. But the original Battlefield, the most successful one in the series, has only achieved 30 million. And remember, that's 23 years. Within 23 years, 30 million. and they think the new Battlefield will hit 100 million. Okay. Now, yes, you can argue that they're going to make the new Battlefield free to play, and there are more people playing video games now than there have been in years. But I would also argue that there is no space left. There is no attention space left. People have found their game. Live service games are floundering. Is an extreme outlier that Marvel Rivals is doing well. But every other live service game that has launched since has flopped real fucking hard. And they're still going with that shit. Anyway, as I said, the rest of the article is pretty interesting, but I wanted to point out that one on how EA expectations, video game upper management, upper leadership, executive leadership, and their expectations are just completely devoid from reality. Anyway, moving on. Okay, Krafton appoints Steve Papoutsis as unknown world CEO. Former leadership team leaves. So this is an interesting one. So Steve Papoutsis, CEO, is replacing the previous leadership team. And then rather concerningly, former CEO Ted Gill, co-founder, creative director Charlie Cleveland, and co-founder and CTO Max McGuire have now left the studio effective immediately. No reason was given for their departure, but I think appointing Steve Papoutsis as CEO is probably a pretty good reason for that departure. So this is Krafton parachuting in somebody to take over the studio. And the original people who've been there for a very long time. Remember, 2001 was when Unknown Worlds was founded. It's 25 years-ish. Only for Krafton to come in. When did Krafton acquire them? Doesn't say. Hang on, maybe it says it here. 2021, so it wasn't even that long ago that Krafton acquired them. Anyway, Unknown Worlds, you may not be familiar with the name, but you might be familiar with the game. They're the Subnautica people, so they're working on Subnautica 2 at the moment. And Krafton have parachuted in Steve Papoutsis. Krafton said it had sought to keep the Unknown Worlds co-founders and original creators of the Subnautica series involved with the series sequel, but they went, no, fuck you. Pretty much. So who's Steve Papoutsis and why did they feel the need to just completely leave when he was added? Steve Papoutsis is the former CEO of Striking Distance, which is the Callisto Protocol. And you may recall that Krafton were not exactly fond of the Callisto Protocol's performance. And critically, it was not received particularly well. But on top of that, he used to be vice president of Visceral Games, who are the Dead Space guys, who EA also shit-canned. So he's got two failed studios. Now, arguably, Visceral Games shouldn't have failed. That was EA just being EA. Striking Distance, I think, probably yes. And considering what's come out about Steve Papoutsis since then, working with him, he's all about crunch and thinks it's a vocation and an honor to be a developer and what have you. It's fine, you can say that when you make CEO money, but when you're just making entry-level developer money, that's kind of a shit thing to drop on them. Anyway, so yeah, not surprising that they decided to jump ship, and it's a little concerning from Krafton that they would put him in charge of another studio. Anyway, so good luck with Subnautica 2. Anyway, moving on. Former Ubisoft execs convicted for sexual assault, psychological harassment. So this is the fallout from the sexual assault, sexual harassment trial that had been going on over in France. French court has sentenced 3 former Ubisoft executives to suspended prison terms. Fuck's sake. There's no justice. Now, yes, a suspended prison term is still technically a sentencing. They're still technically found guilty of these crimes, but they won't go to prison. Which is kind of shit. Anyway, charges include sexual assault and enabling a culture of sexual and psychological harassment. So this includes former editorial vice president Thomas Francois, former chief creative officer Serge Hascoët, and former games director Guillaume Patrux, and they have received 3 years, 18 months, and 12 months, respectively. Anyway, Ubisoft executives frequently abuse their power to harass and bully employees. There were constant comments about sex and their bodies, the women working there, made to endure sexist and homophobic jokes, touched physically without consent. One particular woman was tied to a chair, forced to do handstands, presumably these were separate events, and made to listen to pornography being played in an open plan office. It's great. It's super disgusting. I love it. I don't. Anyway. He was my superior and I was afraid of him. He made me do handstands. I did it just to get it over with and get rid of him. Cool stuff. Anyway. All three of them denied the charges, but state prosecutors basically laid out their case to show overwhelming evidence of harassment within Ubisoft and claimed the video game industry has systemic issues with sexism and abuse. Yes, just look at Blizzard, the Cosby Suite, Activision, Bobby Kotick getting somebody to kill themselves, and there's a lot. There's some really bad shit there. Anyway, some justice, but not enough. Like, a suspended sentence is bullshit. For what is sexual assault. Suspended sentence. And they wonder why women don't come forward about these things. Anyway, moving on. Some maybe good news. Hard to say. Geo Media sells Kotaku to digital publishing company Layoffs. I think that's how you pronounce that. Anyway. Layoffs has acquired Kotaku from Geo Media, so Kotaku's editorial staff will remain on site and more senior staff will be hired. If you aren't familiar with the kind of background stuff of Geo Media, Kotaku, and so on, Geo Media is like Spanfeller thing who kind of bought like Gawker, Gizmodo, bunch of other things. It's like a sports one, Defector, I think it was called. Kotaku was part of that as well, and has generally run it like a private equity, extracting all of the value from the company while putting no money back into it. They weren't allowed to hire anybody. It's like 6 employees or something at Kotaku, something ridiculous. Actual employees, and then the rest of them are contractors. So this is like, in the immediate term, it's good news. It's just a question of, will Layoffs prove to also be a private equity shithead thing, or will they actually let them have their, freedom? Anyway, Layoff CEO Jean-Guillemot Kleiss said he had no immediate strategy shifts and he hasn't yet met with Kotaku's editor-in-chief, which is a bit weird of you, acquiring an outlet and having not spoken with, like, the top person at that. That's a bit strange. I found that a bit odd. Anyway, we are honored to shape its future and make such an iconic gaming brand part of our family as part of our bold vision for Layoffs and ongoing US expansion. That's also not a great thing to hear when you haven't met with the team. We are honored to shape its future. We haven't met with the team, so we here is Layoffs' uppers. So again, maybe it's good news. Again, immediately getting away from Jim Spanfeller is obviously great news. Look him up. He's a real piece of shit. Anyway, he had to say is that he was very happy we are able to find a great home for Kotaku and its entire staff, of which I've done out of my way to piss off and get them to leave. But anyway, wish the team and Layoffs only the best. Sure he did. Anyway, Geo Media is predominantly owned by growth equity firm Great Hill Partners. Given how both private equity and growth equity work, it became clear to our investors that it was time to move on. It had been time to move on a long time ago. It was in fact never time to move in. What were you doing? You have no business owning a journalistic outlet. But anyway, being under Geo Media, Kotaku experienced major shakeups to its editorial staff. Editor-in-chief was fired middle of 2023. The editor-in-chief who then took over left in October. They took on the role in October and then left in March. And they basically, this was when Kotaku allegedly took the onus to stop reporting so much on news and to focus mostly on guides. And at that point, I think they went on strike. Anyway, I firmly believe that the decision to invert Kotaku's editorial strategy to deprioritize news in favor of guides is fundamentally misguided given the current infrastructure of the site, which was essentially they don't have enough people for what they wanted. Because again, he wouldn't hire anybody. Anyway, the decision is directly contradicted by this month's traffic data, which basically show that everyone was going to the news and not going to the guides. It's an astonishing disregard for the livelihoods of the remaining writers and editors who work here. So that was back in 2023. 2022, so earlier, a union representing staff from all of the other GO brands, which included Kotaku, went on strike for better salaries, parental leave, and healthcare. Agreement was reached after 4 days, but they still, they didn't stick to the agreement was kind of the issue in 2023. Anyway, it's potentially good news. Like I said, it's good news in the immediate term because they're away from Spanfeller, but whether it proves to be good news going forward, it's concerning that I didn't meet with the editor-in-chief, but we're honored to shape its future. I don't know, I don't like the sound of it. Anyway, moving on, last thing. So I did say that we would, come back to games preservation stuff for Anthem. So this is the Stop Killing Games petition, achieves 1 million signatures goal. So this was started after Ubisoft shut down The Crew. You may recall, Crew being an entirely online-only game, not playable offline at all, and they made no attempt to offer player-hosted servers and stuff like that. They just wanted the game gone. So they took up this petition to basically say that stop letting video game studios sell a product that ostensibly has a lifetime of forever. You own it, you can play it forever kind of thing, and they, you actually can only play it until the server's shut down. So it's consumer misleading, false advertising. There's a couple of different headers this could come under. Anyway, there was a petition for it going around at the EU level. There's a similar one for the UK level as well that I think is sitting somewhere around 600,000 signatures. Anyway, the Stop Killing Games petition is designed to preserve video games, with many titles resorting to online-only states of play. It means that if a company decides to shut down its servers, or if the company itself goes under, or any other number of things, you can't play the game you've paid for ever again. So the movement began in 2024. Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods, with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. So why is it hitting the 1 million mark important? That means that the EU is somewhat required to address the petition in some way. Now, so in the article, I don't know who this quote is attributed to, but this now means the EU will likely address the matter and bring in legislation to counteract. No, there's no likeliness here. They may address the matter. And the idea that they'll bring in, guaranteed to bring in legislation, no, absolutely not. What we'll get is lip service, almost certainly. Almost all those change.org petitions. Having it sent to the EU, somewhat better because they're not as captured by, corporate overlords. I say as captured, they are still very much captured by them, but not to the extent that the US is. So potentially we'll see some legislation, but it's unlikely. Anyway, there's a very strong chance the European Commission will pass new law, no they won't, that will both protect consumer rights to retain video games that customers have purchased and advance preservation efforts massively. I don't see this happening. Or if it does, it will be massively weakened to the point of it being meaningless. But yeah, again, getting the petition there and getting it to its 1 million goal, which again, similar to a change.org thing, the EU may look at it. It is a significant number of signatures to get. Disclosure, I have signed it. Now, potentially, those 1 million signatures may not all be real people, so there is still a push to get, comfortably over the 1 million mark. No, so they, Rick Scott, Ross Scott, who started the petition, is saying that yes, we've hit the million, but keep sharing it, keep trying to get more people to sign it, because we want to make sure that once they do an audit, to make sure that bots or people signing up twice from different IPs and that kind of thing, that when they've removed all of those, that it's still at 1 million. That anyway, that's the case. We'll leave, I guess, Mecha Break. Like I said, there weren't exactly many great new releases this week. Anyway, that's your news for the 30th of June to the 6th of July 2025. Obviously, the Xbox layoffs is extremely bad for the industry. It's a massive loss of, like, not just products or projects, but also, like, industry experience. A massive brain drain on the Xbox gaming division. How many of those developers will find a new development position, and then how long will that one last before they're laid off? You got to imagine that at some point they'll go, hey, I can make more money outside of the gaming division. I can make more money at, like, financial software or enterprise software or any other kind of software, really, because that's only really coming from, like, people who are working on the code side of things. From the artist side of things, I don't know where they go, really. And that's, like, a kind of scary, it must be a very scary situation to be in. And I hope they're able to land on their feet, but it's like extremely shitty way to treat them. Only because you've put in too much money into generative AI. There was another story, I didn't add it, but there was another story from some Microsoft executive saying, hey, guys who've just been laid off, why not use AI to help you get your resume together and start looking for jobs? Like, it is hard to think that he's just that stupid. Or it is far easier for me to assume that he's deliberately being cruel. Like, especially seeing the news, like, outside of video games and what's happening in the rest of the world. US in particular, and the legislation they've just passed and what have you. Like, the cruelty, the glee in just shitting on these people who are just trying to make a living. The Battlefield story on how there's a culture disconnect between developers who just want to make a good game. We want to make the best game and have the best gaming experience for our players, I think is the quote. And they're coming up against, EA upper management who just want to look at what the next quarter numbers. That's it. They do not care if the game is good. They do not care if it's a good experience. All they care is money. And I can't remember where I heard it now, but it was the idea that so many tech firms right now, that their C-level, C-suite are almost majority MBAs. And, like, all of the CEOs except Meta, the CEO is an MBA. Like, there are no engineers at the higher level. There are no, like, people of craft, people who are making the thing and have pride in creating a good product for people, something people want to use, something that really helps people. They're not at that level. They've been cut out. Like, even Google's search team, up until search turned to shit, which is like 10 years ago or something like that now, the search team was led by an engineer who had been there almost from the beginning, just working on the search product and trying to make it better, trying to make Google where it was at the time, head of search. Like, easy. It fucking turned into a verb. Google it. It was so good at it. And they pushed that guy out and gave it to an ads marketing guy. And that's why search is so shit now. That they just want people on the Google search site seeing ads, not finding the thing they were looking for. Anyway, I don't want to get into a bigger tech talk, but it's the same at, like, video game publishers. Like, there aren't developers at that high level. It's business MBA shitheads. And it was a joke on the Better Offline podcast, I think, from Ed Zitron, who's like saying that MBA should not be allowed to be CEOs ever again. And, like, I agree with that part. And then he kind of went on. It was a little bit more unhinged, but it's like they should not allowed to be what was he saying? They shouldn't have access to housing or something like that. It was like, just kill them all off. But anyway, the first part I'm okay with. Anyway, what else were we talking about? The Ars Technica story around Battlefield. Again, we are looking, I feel like, at another Anthem situation. Time will tell what happens with Battlefield. But EA putting all of their eggs in this one basket, pivoting to a Call of Duty approach where they have the Battlefield mines. I talked about that earlier with how EA Motive, who made the Dead Space remake and didn't just get moved on to the Dead Space 2 remake. No. Or a new Dead Space. No. Go help with Battlefield. Okay. Criterion, who are primarily known for racing, Burnout series, and now the Need for Speed series, and because Codemasters have disappeared, I guess the Rally series is as well. But no, Battlefield. Not the racing games that they're well known for. No. Battlefield. The single-player Battlefield. Not like, okay, we'll have them do the Jeep controls or something, I don't know. No, work on the single-player game. Okay. That makes sense. To somebody, I guess. Again, if you had had an engineer, developer at the higher level, they would have been able to tell you that their skills are not suited to this project. But they're just going to see developer. Why can't they do same thing? If they even think that far ahead, I don't think they do. I think it does come back down to if we just throw enough money at this, we'll turn it into a unicorn game that makes us money forever. Never mind that that's never happened for anybody. Even Fortnite doesn't make as much money as it used to. Call of Duty doesn't make as much money as it used to. And there are so many other live service games going, like the Hoyoverse, the Genshin Impact stuff makes a shit ton of money, but also has a shit ton of attention required to it. And they're already cannibalizing themselves with 2 other live service games. Yeah, there's a mention in Ars Technica about cannibalizing other people's sales. Like, in order for Battlefield to hit its 100 million stuff, they're assuming that they can just live alongside Call of Duty or live alongside Fortnite and not have to take players from Fortnite, which is what they'll have to do, and it's not going to happen. But anyway, yeah, the sexual assault, sexual harassment Ubisoft trial is disappointing that it's suspended sentences, and it's purely because they're like of means, I would think. That's the only reason I can think of why they wouldn't go to prison for that kind of thing. Especially if it's sexual assault specifically. Like sexual harassment, I don't know the definitions, like the actual crime definition of either of them, but maybe one of them is considered a lesser crime than the other. I don't know. I'm not sure if they're considered equivalent. Sexual assault has the word assault in it. I feel like that means prison. You know? If you took away the word sexual and it was just assault, you hit somebody, you know, violently. Or I guess they call it violent assault. Anyway, my point is, I feel like if you're having to add a term to it, it should means it's worse. The Stop Killing Games petition. Like, I hope something does come of it. Like, I do hope there would be some legislation, some consumer protection around video games, because there really isn't any at all. Like, a lot of people at the level of making laws don't play video games. They don't see the frustration and the friction that players feel when they buy a game, think it'll be around for a long time, and it's, you know, barely lasts a year kind of thing. They don't see it, so they don't feel any need to like pass any legislation around it, and it does allow publishers to just fly under the radar and get away with anything, really. We really do just need a purge of old people in legislative positions, just to get not even necessarily old people, but people who actually have to engage with the real world and aren't in a position where they have enough money that they don't have to engage with the real world. Anyway, This isn't just necessarily for video games, obviously, but it's just in general kind of thing. Anyway, before I angry up the blood too much more, I'm going to head off. Have a good rest of your day, week, what have you. We'll hear more probably about Xbox layoffs later in the week, and we'll have a little bit more to say about Game Pass things next week. Until then, have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye.